Hello, this is John DeSalvo, and I'd like to welcome you all to Mysteries of the Universe with myself, Dr. John DeSalvo, and Dr. J.J. Hurtak, and Dr. Desiree Hurtak. And we are going to do a series of programs on different topics of science, mysteries, of ancient monuments, maybe areas of the paranormal, but our basic plan is to cover topics in a very scientific, logical, and skeptical manner. And also many areas of research that you may not be aware of. And Dr. JJ and myself have been involved researching together for decades. In fact, he's director of research of the Great Pyramid of Giza Research Association, which I founded. And we're going to do our first show today on the Great Pyramid of Giza and pyramid research. And I think you'll be amazed of the work that Dr. Hurtak has done. Maybe a good way to start also is to introduce ourselves to new listeners and even people that have heard us elsewhere of certain things in our background that you may not be aware of. So if we could, let me first introduce Dr. J.J. Hurtak, and maybe he can tell you a little bit about himself. And all I can say is he's been one of my most closest, truest, and trusted friend and colleague in decades. And I think his service to the world has just been outstanding. So Dr. Hurtak, take it away.
Thank you, John. Yes, I'm Dr. J.J. Hurtak. I'm a social scientist, a futurist, a specialist in remote sensing technology, that is to say, using radar and remote sensing tools to look at archaeological targets from space as well as from the ground. And I've been involved with research in Egypt for more than 40 years. Also, my wife, Dr. Desiree, and I have been involved with research from Central Asia, all the way to South Africa, all the way to the Americas, where we've been working recently with the pyramids of Yucatan, Mexico. By background, I have 2 doctorates, one from the University of Minnesota, a second from the University of California. I have the opportunity to work also as a young scholar at the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions, which was a preeminent think tank back in the 1960s and 70s. We had great minds participating at that time, such as Harvey Wheeler, who wrote the book Failsafe that was made into a movie, Rex Tugwell, who was the economic advisor to President Roosevelt. Many of the top researchers, I was invited by Robert Hutchins to be an Orientalist with the center. And so I've had the opportunity to travel throughout the world and to use scientific measurements to look behind the scenes to ask the difficult questions of where we have come from as a human race, why we're here presently, opening, as it were, the front door to the universe, and 3, where do we go from here with the possibility that we're not the only evolution in the universe. So we handle, Desiree and I, the historical record, as well as the psychological, parapsychological, linguistic, and even the cosmological.
Right, as Dr. Hurtak said, we've traveled around the world, seen many of the ancient sites, including the pyramid at Xi'an in China, which is very similar, we think, to many of the other pyramids you find around the world. We've also gone down to Peru, and many people think about in Bolivia, Tiahuanaco and other places like that, but they actually have many pyramids in Peru as well. So this is all part of, really, we consider an ancient grid system, with the Great Pyramid, your research, John, as being really the hub of at least this last 6,000 years of history. And we're really amazed with what we find in the area, not only of Giza, but of course, all along the Nile. So that's been a fascination. We've done a lot of sound testing, both in Mexico, in the Yucatan especially, but also in the area of the Great Pyramid. So,
and this has been with permission of the government of Egypt and also INA and the universities of Mexico. So we have brought with us top anthropologists, top researchers in archaeology, remote sensing, linguistics. So we have the teamwork necessary to look at the challenges of what the ancient archives and libraries of teaching have to tell us. And I wanted to say on behalf of my wife, she has her doctorate. She also has the economic and academic tools really to make things work. We put out series of films that we received international awards for regarding some of our research in the interface between modern psychology and what we call traditional religion and philosophy.
I just want to say also we've looked at some of the ancient legends, not only of Egypt and the Middle East, but also of Africa and of the Yucatan.
We received international awards for our movie on the life of Mutwa, a famous Zulu shaman that we worked with for more than 30 years, and his cosmology of East Africa. We have had the opportunity also to work with the late John Anthony West and others in Egypt who are very famous for their work on the Great Sphinx with Dr. Robert Schock from Boston University.
So let's hear from you, John.
Sure. Oh, I was going to say John Anthony West was one of my first board members on a Great Pyramid of Giza Research Association, which I mentioned that you, JJ, are the research director, and Robert Schock is a member too, and a very good friend. I guess I wanted to say something interesting before I talk a little bit about myself. Is when I started telling my friends, I'm pretty active on Facebook and social media, that we were planning on doing a show together, I got such a tremendous, overwhelming response. I mean, one of the greatest numbers of likes that I've ever seen, and comments. And the most common comment was, it's nice to see a group of 3 real, credible scientists together studying the metaphysics, ancient monuments, even the paranormal. I know, we may not get into that aspect as deep as some others think they may want us to, but we approach things in a scientific manner. And the other thing I wanted to mention, how I met you, Dr. Hurtak, was decades and decades ago. I was listening to the Art Bell show, which was my inspiration, and you were on with Desiree. I never heard you before. I didn't know anything about you, and you were talking about your book, The Keys of Enoch. And that night I went to bed, and I basically had what I don't know what people call a high dream, a metaphysical, an astral experience. It was like I was in another dimension, and I attributed it to the stuff that you were talking about. And I remember trying to call you the next day, and I was able to reach you. And I know it's almost impossible for people to reach you, and you felt we were meant to work together. And that was like, I think 20 years ago or more. So we have a long, long history. I want people to realize this is not just a kind of a trivial radio show of putting a bunch of people together. This is unique. This is a show you're not going to see elsewhere. And you're going to hear from people that I feel like Dr. Desiree and Dr. Hurtak are credible scholars. Now, just a little bit about myself is I'm a retired college professor. My PhD and master's are in biophysics, and my bachelor's is in physics. And I was Dean of Student Affairs at a university, a health science institution. And I also taught biochemistry, human physiology. I even taught human gross anatomy at the University of Illinois. In fact, I have 11 books published by Barnes & Noble and Inner Traditions. And one of them, Decoding the Pyramids, we featured you, Dr. Hurtak, in your work with Orion. And that's something I hope we can cover within this show, and you made a great contribution to that book, which is out of print, so I'm not trying to push my books. Anyway, the other thing is I taught neurophysiology at Johns Hopkins class there, and so my whole background is physics, biophysics, neurophysiology, and again, I use a scientific method, and I think this is the wave of the future in this areas that we're talking about, because one of the problems we're fighting is we have the academics who think a lot of this is a joke. And then we have, I hate the term new age, but new age, the people who just accept everything without any facts. And here, us 3, we're right in the middle. We're believers, and yet we want to look at things skeptically, analytically, and with data. And that's why I think we make such a good team. I had NSF, NIH, and USPH grants for my research. I'm just trying to think. I've been on Ancient Aliens about 6 times if people recognize me. I think I look younger now, don't I? I'm not sure. But anyway, maybe it's the vitamins.
You have the dynamic to push the envelope, and I congratulate you for your great books.
Thank you.
also recognizing that we need to have, as it were, a crosstalk between the disciplines, because
Yes.
those in physics, as we know, we also work in areas of physics and mathematics, do not accept areas of Egyptology, which they think is Romantic history. And those in Egyptology and the philosophies of the East do not accept certain empirical norms in the West that are simply two-dimensional exercises on the blackboard without exercising the real experience of the heart, mind, and spirit. So we collectively represent really a whole new direction. I call future science. That's the name of our organization. Future science is science guided by consciousness. In consciousness, I mean the higher consciousness, which is behind the evolution of the material realm as well as the mental realm. This is work that's been looked at by the Noetics Institute that my colleague, astronaut Edgar Mitchell, founded many years ago, and we're members of his board through FIONS. And so we're really ensconced with some of the top researchers, both behind the scenes as well as working in the trenches of what's coming out of Mother Earth. And in that direction, I published the book called The Keys of Enoch in 1973, that is an overall look of how we can bring together the many disciplines, the many different traditions from the standpoint of a higher vibratory meta-language.
But at the heart of the Keys of Enoch and some of the chapters is the importance of the Great Pyramid. And I think it's important to say that we feel that there is certain alignments. In fact, the Keys of Enoch was one of the first books to show that one of the star shafts, that is the one from the King's Chamber,
The Southern Star Shaft,
was aligned with Orion. And of course, Robert Bauval made that popular later on. Probably talking about our background, you mentioned it a little bit. We were a part of the shore expedition in Egypt that took place in 96, 97. And what it was is, many people think it was just 3 pyramids on the plateau or a couple queen pyramids and a few tombs, but you know, the whole plateau is loaded, as you know. And there's what was called well shafts or deep shafts into the ground. You find the same thing at Saqqara. But one particular shaft had a unique alignment between the 2 main pyramids there, the largest ones. And at that point, we went down 100 feet, which is about 30, 33 meters. It's a little bit more than 100 feet. It was 3 stages down underneath the ground to find this amazing tomb. Literally, people call it a tomb. We don't even think it's a tomb, because why would you ever go that far to bury somebody? It had water in the area, and it had, you know, square corners, and it had pillars. So it was almost like an altar situation.
So we're going to talk about this in terms of our series now with you, John, Mysteries of the Universe. And so we are going to use this as an opportunity to tell our audience worldwide that we're interested in looking at these benchmarks of human discovery, how this relates to the horizons of new space and time, and how all of these subjects give us, as it were, a different understanding of what I will call human consciousness as the hidden variable.
Right, I just want to say, so that was called by Zahi Hawass, who was then head of the Antiquities Department, the Tomb of Osiris, because Osiris was the god of the underworld. And of course, you go down there and you see these pillars and you see the moat around it, and you have something that looks like a coffin. You know, you figure that's the place for Osiris. Of course, Osiris, in a certain sense, probably was a mythical figure or something that came from way, way back, certainly beyond 6, even 10,000 years. In fact, supposedly, he went around the planet and taught people the wisdom of the heavens through music.
Plus music, yes.
Through music, yeah.
This is what I call acoustical physics, and this is what we used as we were able to go down and, with our team, find the quote-unquote Tomb of Osiris. But we're going to show pictures of this in future sessions with you. I want to simply use this as a overview of mysteries of the universe that we're going to tackle. Egyptology, we're going to look at the pyramids in Yucatan, Mexico. We're going to talk about the pyramids on Mars, which was released, first of all, in the Keys of Enoch as a metaphysical, paraphysical textbook. We're going to look at some of the artifacts from the Holy Land and the surrounding countries. Take a look at Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, where we have worked, as well as Central Asia. So the overall scope of this is to see planetary humanity as a whole. rediscovering its past, its origins, as well as understanding the cosmic frontier.
You know, I wanted to mention too, JJ, is that our association's website, and maybe you can mention your website too, for listeners who like to get a preview and some more information, is our Great Pyramid of Giza Research Association, which I founded back in the 1990s. We have the largest international board, over 30 of the top known pyramid researchers. Again, you're research director for this. And it's GizaPyramid.com, GizaPyramid.com, GizaPyramid.com. Also, I know we're going to have probably a session on the Russian pyramid research, because both you and I, which is very interesting, have been involved with the Russians and Ukrainians in their pyramid research. In fact, I was spokesperson for the Russians for about 8 years regarding their pyramid research. And I was also privy to some of the Ukrainian psychic research. And I know you also have a ton of information and a ton of research on this. But what I find was so funny is we both, I think, were working with the Russians and Ukrainians around the same time and didn't even know it. We weren't really in communications at that time. So it's going to be fun, because I'm going to learn a lot from you, and you're going to learn, hopefully, stuff from me. And I think the show is going to really open up a lot of new secrets and thoughts and ideas. But what you said, yeah, to lay the foundations, we have so much to discover. The hidden shafts in the pyramid, what's the story about that? The works. What I like about you too is you're always on site. You know, I'm not like that. I don't travel as much, but you are there. You are witnesses. And the other interesting thing is, I got to say this, is that the Keys of Enoch, your book, the Enoch, I never pronounce Enoch right. I don't know. I'm from New York. I don't have an excuse though. But the Keys of Enoch is one of the most significant books I've read in my life. And I just hear that over and over again from people on my website, on my social media, and I always recommend it. And I'm always honored when you visit me. I always have you sign something new in it, and I treasure that. But for listeners, that's the book I would recommend. I'd recommend my book, but it's out of print, so maybe you can find it in a used bookstore.
Yeah, we know we need to get that back.
Go to our website, keysofenoch.org or futurescience.org. You'll be able to see the listing of our books. We've also written quite a few papers on our international websites dealing with the new physics of consciousness, and we're involved basically with the whole planet. So in practical language, this is so important at this time that we pull together information showing a roadmap of where new people interested in the future of humanity can see that we're working with a culture of futurism, a positive future that has to come from the inner depths of real involvement. It cannot come from superficial books of people who write books on Egypt who have never really worked with archaeological tools or remote sensing tools, or people who simply do not understand that we have to pull together during a time of a culture of violence, which the international media and particularly the local media seems to emphasize always the negative culture of death rather than the culture of inspiration in life. So we are very thankful we have the opportunity to look at these great libraries of wisdom, to actually locate them through what some will call the paraphysical ability of remote viewing and remote sensing, the use of radar and other tools, and more importantly, to write textbooks as well as monographs, position papers that we can discuss at the World Forums. As you know, Desiree and I have been involved with major universities and even programs of environmental research connected with the United Nations. So we are pulling together this series of conversations so that we can go beyond, as it were, the shadow of the past and look at the bright light.
Yeah, no, I was gonna ask Dr. Desiree real quick. You wrote a book on the Sophia. If you could, I find that incredible, and it's amazing the interest in the Sophia today. So I was wondering if you could mention the book and the complete title and where to get it.
Well, as you mentioned, we've worked a bit in Egypt and throughout the Middle East. One of the things that people don't realize is, Egypt itself has two great religions. Of course, one is the Muslim and the other is the Coptics. And if you go back to about the time of Jesus, you find that the Coptics were really very dominant at that time. And they had a language where they used Greek, almost like we use English letters or Greek letters, but the words themselves were Egyptian. And this is the Gnostic Coptic documents. And actually, I haven't done it alone. Dr. Hurtak and I co-write many of our books together. And so we did two ancient scrolls from Egypt that have been discovered. One's called the Gospel of Mary. It's very small, so it's easy for people to pick up. It's not about Mary. I often have to say that. You know, she didn't write about herself. She wrote about her wisdom. And that's really quite profound. And the other one you're talking about,
the Pistis Sophia is actually 5 volumes.
Sophia.
This is a 1,000-page book dealing with the teachings of Jesus' disciples of the 2nd and 3rd century, dealing with the wisdom of what I call the cosmic Christ, or the greater concept of the divine human partnership. And this book was put together as a result of work I did early on as a young student. I went to Egypt for one summer session to study Coptic literature. At that time, the Nag Hammadi texts were being discovered, which were writings of the early Christians in Egypt, the Coptic Christians. And so I was interested in looking at the possibility that there could be a bridge of understanding to the wisdom of the past through much of these early writers who were, for the most part, marginalized by the orthodoxy of the church.
So what's interesting is that the Pistis Sophia talks about other heavens and talks about, it's really supposed to be, and it starts at the very beginning, some years after Jesus resurrected, and then he comes back and he tells his disciples, you know, what's going on the planet, what's going on in the heavens, and that's really what it's all about. And I know you're interested in a little bit of this because you also were key in the Shroud of Turin, which we were also on Coast to Coast talking about in the past, because really scientifically, if you look at it, it really is a transformation from matter to light, which is exactly what the scriptures talk about.
Well, anyway, I tell you, I'm very excited about the series. I'm excited about working with both of you. And I think the listeners are going to get something from here that they're not going to get anywhere else. And the most important thing is enlightenment, higher consciousness, and maybe a better understanding of ourself and place in the universe. So maybe with that said, I will say goodbye. Wish everyone a wonderful day. Sending them my love and blessings. And maybe you want to say a last couple remarks, and we'll end the
we
show.
invite all of you to stay tuned to us because we're living in most exciting times. We're really at the threshold of recognizing what astronaut Mitchell and our other colleague, astronaut Gordon Cooper, said. We're really beginning to discover that we're not alone in the universe. And to that end of looking at a whole new cosmology of where we are and where we're going, we invite all of you to stay in touch with us because you are important.
Yes. Well, thank you. And wishing all of you a wonderful day, and God bless you all.
Thank you.